Breaking into our top 10 is Libya at number 10. More than a decade after the 2011 NATO-backed uprising that overthrew Muammar Gaddafi, the promise of a democratic and stable Libya has failed to materialize. Instead, the country fractured, descending into a prolonged and complex civil war. The nation has been split between rival governments and a dizzying array of militias, all vying for control of territory and the country's vast oil wealth. The main source of insecurity is really this political and military division. For years, the country was essentially divided between an administration in the east, led by General Khalifa Haftar and his Libyan National Army, and the UN-recognized Government of National Unity in the west, based in Tripoli. While a ceasefire has largely held since 2020, the country remains a patchwork of territories controlled by various armed groups, many of whom are motivated more by profit than ideology. They run detention centers for migrants, engage in smuggling, and operate outside of any formal legal framework. The presence of foreign powers and mercenaries has further fueled the conflict, turning Libya into a proxy battleground. Turkey has backed the government in Tripoli, while countries like the UAE, Egypt, and Russia have supported Haftar. This foreign interference has made any internal political settlement incredibly difficult. For ordinary Libyans, this means living with a collapsed economy, failing public services, and the constant threat that the fragile peace could shatter at any moment, plunging the country back into full-scale war. At number 9, we arrive in Africa's most populous nation, Nigeria. It's a regional powerhouse, a cultural giant, but it is also beset by a multitude of severe security crises. The one that gets the most international attention is the Boko Haram insurgency in the northeast. For over a decade, this group and its offshoot, ISWAP, have waged a brutal campaign, killing tens of thousands and displacing millions. While the military has retaken territory, the groups remain a potent threat, conducting raids, bombings, and kidnappings. But Nigeria's insecurity is far from a single-issue problem. In the northwest and central regions, there's a different but equally deadly crisis-rampant violence from heavily armed criminal gangs, locally referred to as bandits. They raid villages, rustle cattle on a massive scale, and have turned kidnapping for ransom into a horrifying industry, famously targeting schools and kidnapping hundreds of students at a time. This violence is often intertwined with long-standing conflicts between farmers and herders over land and resources. On top of all this, there is also a low-level separatist agitation in the southeast, and piracy in the Gulf of Guinea off its southern coast. The Nigerian security forces are stretched incredibly thin, fighting on multiple fronts. This pervasive insecurity has a devastating impact on the economy, disrupting agriculture and commerce, and it deepens the existing ethnic and religious fault lines in this incredibly diverse country. Nigeria's challenge is tackling these many-headed security threats simultaneously, which is, honestly, a monumental task for any government. Coming in at number 8 is Iraq. This is a country that has been synonymous with conflict and instability for the better part of 2 decades, ever since the US-led invasion in 2003. The invasion toppled Saddam Hussein, but, it also opened a Pandora's box of sectarian violence and insurgency. The darkest chapter in recent years was the rise of ISIS, which at its peak controlled a third of the country and established its so-called caliphate, committing horrific acts of genocide and terror. Although ISIS was territorially defeated in Iraq in 2017, the group is not gone. It has morphed back into an insurgent force, carrying out hit-and-run attacks, bombings, and assassinations, particularly in the rural and remote areas of northern and western Iraq. The fight against ISIS has left deep scars on the country. Entire cities like Mosul were destroyed, millions were displaced, and the social fabric, particularly between Sunni and Shia communities, was torn apart. The process of rebuilding and reconciliation is a slow and painful one. Beyond the threat of ISIS remnants, Iraq's security is undermined by its fragile political system, which is plagued by corruption and sectarian divisions. Powerful Shia militias, many of them backed by Iran, operate with a great deal of autonomy and often act outside of state control, challenging the government's authority. The country also finds itself caught in the middle of the regional rivalry between the United States and Iran, becoming a theater for their proxy conflicts. For Iraqis, after decades of war, achieving lasting peace and stability remains an elusive goal. At number 7, we have the Democratic Republic of the Congo, or DRC. This vast, mineral-rich country in the heart of Africa has been the setting for what is sometimes called Africa's World War, a conflict that has drawn in numerous neighboring countries and has claimed millions of lives, mostly from disease and starvation. While the large-scale war is over, the eastern part of the country, in particular, remains one of the most violent and unstable places on Earth. The insecurity in the eastern DRC is driven by a bewildering number of armed groups, well over 100 of them. Some are remnants of past wars, some are local self-defense militias, and others are linked to criminal networks trafficking the DRC's vast mineral wealth, like gold, diamonds, and coltan, which is used in our cell phones. These groups terrorize local populations, carrying out massacres, rapes, and forced recruitment of child soldiers. The Congolese army is often ineffective and is itself accused of preying on the population it's supposed to protect. In recent years, the violence has been exacerbated by the resurgence of a rebel group called the M23, which the UN and the DRC government say is backed by neighboring Rwanda. This has reignited regional tensions and led to heavy fighting and the displacement of hundreds of thousands of people. The DRC's insecurity is a tragic paradox, a country with immense natural wealth that could make its people rich, but instead, that very wealth fuels a cycle of violence and exploitation that creates a never-ending humanitarian crisis. Just missing out on our top 5 at number 6 is the Central African Republic, or CAR. This is another country, like the DRC, that is incredibly rich in resources like diamonds and gold, but is desperately poor and has been plagued by conflict for most of its existence. The most recent and devastating phase of conflict began in 2013 when a coalition of mostly Muslim rebels, the Salika, seized power, leading to the formation of Christian self-defense militias called the Anti-Balaka. What followed was a spiral of brutal sectarian violence that tore the country apart. Although a peace deal was signed in 2019, it has never really held. The country is effectively partitioned, with the government controlling the capital, Bangui, and some surrounding areas, while a coalition of rebel groups controls most of the countryside. These armed groups control the mines, set up illegal checkpoints, and terrorize the civilian population with impunity. For many people in CAR, the state simply does not exist. The security landscape in CAR is further complicated by the heavy presence of Russian mercenaries from the Wagner Group. They were brought in to protect the government and have helped it retake some territory, but they have also been widely accused of gross human rights violations, including summary executions, torture, and indiscriminate attacks on civilians. The CAR is a textbook example of a fragile state, held hostage by armed groups and foreign actors, where the rule of law has been replaced by the rule of the gun. So we are now into our top 5 most insecure countries, and at number 5 is Yemen. Located at the southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula, Yemen has been devastated by a civil war that started in late 2014. The conflict pits the Iran-aligned Houthi movement against the internationally recognized government, which is backed by a military coalition led by Saudi Arabia and the UAE. What began as an internal power struggle has, morphed into a brutal regional proxy war. The war has been characterized by a Saudi-led air campaign that has destroyed critical infrastructure and a Houthi siege of cities, leading to what the United Nations has for years called the world's worst humanitarian crisis. The direct fighting has killed tens of thousands, but far more have died from the indirect consequences: starvation, malnutrition, and preventable diseases like cholera. The warring parties have used access to food and aid as a weapon of war, creating a man-made famine that has pushed millions to the brink of starvation. While a truce in 2022 significantly reduced the fighting, the underlying conflict is unresolved, and the country remains fractured and on a knife's edge. The Houthis control the capital, Sana'a, and much of the north, while the south is a patchwork of competing factions. The economy is in shambles, basic services have collapsed, and millions of Yemenis depend entirely on humanitarian aid to survive. Yemen is, honestly, a catastrophic example of how a civil war, fueled by regional powers, can completely annihilate a country and its people. At number 4, we have a country whose name has been a byword for failed state for 3 decades, Somalia. The central government collapsed in 1991, plunging the country into a clan-based civil war from which it has never fully recovered. While a federal government has been slowly pieced back together in the capital, Mogadishu, with significant international support, its authority over large parts of the country remains, honestly, pretty tenuous at best. The main driver of insecurity for years has been the Al-Shabaab insurgency. This Al-Qaeda-affiliated group is one of the most resilient and lethal jihadist groups in the world. It controls vast swaths of rural southern and central Somalia, where it runs a shadow government, collecting taxes and imposing its harsh interpretation of Islamic law. From these strongholds, it launches devastating attacks against the Somali government, African Union peacekeepers, and civilians, including large-scale bombings in Mogadishu. On top of the insurgency, Somalia is also on the front lines of climate change. It has been hit by recurrent and severe droughts, which have killed livestock, destroyed crops, and driven millions from their homes, creating massive humanitarian crises and fueling conflict over scarce resources. And let's not forget the issue of piracy off its coast, which, while reduced, has not been completely eliminated. Somalia's struggle is a long and arduous one, fighting against terrorism, political fragmentation, and climate catastrophe all at the same time. Number 3, South Sudan, a nation's broken promise. Our bronze medalist for insecurity at number 3 is the world's youngest country, South Sudan. After a long and bloody struggle for independence from Sudan, South Sudan was born in 2011 with so much hope and international goodwill. But just 2 years later, that hope was shattered when a political rivalry between the president and his deputy exploded into a civil war, largely fought along ethnic lines. The civil war was exceptionally brutal, characterized by mass atrocities, including ethnic massacres and the widespread use of sexual violence as a weapon of war. Although a peace agreement was signed in 2018 and the rival leaders formed a unity government, the deal has been implemented at a snail's pace, and the country remains deeply fragile. The national conflict has morphed into a tapestry of localized violence, with communities turning on each other, often armed and instigated by political elites. The state is barely functional. It is unable to provide basic security or services to its people. The country is awash with weapons, and cycles of cattle raiding, revenge killings, and clashes over resources are a part of daily life in many areas. This chronic violence, combined with catastrophic flooding in recent years, has created one of the worst refugee and food security crises on the continent. South Sudan is the tragic story of a dream of freedom that has devolved into a nightmare of self-destruction. Number 2, Syria, a decade of destruction. The runner-up spot, at number 2, goes to Syria. The Syrian civil war, which began with peaceful pro-democracy protests in 2011 as part of the Arab Spring, has become one of the most complex and destructive conflicts of the 21st century. The government of Bashar al-Assad responded to the protests with overwhelming force, plunging the country into a war that has drawn in numerous international powers and jihadist groups. The sheer scale of the devastation is hard to comprehend. Hundreds of thousands have been killed, and more than half of the country's pre-war population has been forced from their homes, creating the largest refugee crisis since World War II. The Assad regime has been accused of horrific war crimes, including the use of chemical weapons against its own people, systematic torture in its prisons, and the siege and bombardment of entire cities. Large parts of the country lie in ruins. Today, Syria is a fractured nation. Assad, with backing from Russia and Iran, has regained control over most of the country, but pockets remain in the hands of various actors. The northwest is controlled by Islamist rebel groups and Turkish-backed forces, while the northeast is controlled by US-backed Kurdish forces. ISIS, though territorially defeated, still operates in the desert. The economy is in a state of total collapse, and most of the population lives in extreme poverty. For Syrians, the war may have entered a new, lower-intensity phase, but peace, justice, and security are nowhere in sight. Number 1, Afghanistan, a cycle of conflict. And at number 1, the country facing the highest levels of insecurity in the world is Afghanistan. This is a nation that has been in a state of near constant conflict for over 4 decades, from the Soviet invasion in 1979 to the Civil War of the 90s, the US-led intervention in 2001, and now, the return of the Taliban to power in August 2021. The withdrawal of US and NATO forces and the rapid collapse of the Afghan government plunged the country into a new era of uncertainty and crisis. The primary insecurity now stems from a combination of authoritarian rule, economic collapse, and a persistent terrorist threat. The Taliban government is not recognized by any country in the world. They have imposed harsh restrictions on the population, particularly on women and girls, effectively erasing them from public life by banning them from education, work, and even visiting parks. This has created a climate of fear and repression, and it has led to international isolation and sanctions, which have crippled the economy. On top of this, there is a major humanitarian crisis, with more than half the population facing acute hunger. And despite the Taliban's promises to ensure security, the country faces a potent threat from the Islamic State's regional affiliate, ISIS-K. This group continues to launch deadly attacks, often targeting ethnic and religious minorities like the Hazara. Afghanistan is the ultimate example of a country trapped in a vicious cycle of conflict, where one war simply sets the stage for the next, leaving generations of its people knowing nothing but insecurity. So there you have it, a sobering journey through the 20 countries facing the most acute insecurity in the world today. From Afghanistan to Cameroon, these are places where the basic human right to safety and peace has been shattered. It's easy to look at this list and feel overwhelmed, to see these as distant problems that have nothing to do with us. But the truth is, global security is interconnected. Instability in one region can create refugee crises, disrupt global supply chains, and become a breeding ground for threats that can affect all of us, no matter where we live. But more important than any of that is the human cost. Behind the headlines and statistics are millions of ordinary people, parents, children, doctors, teachers, whose lives have been turned upside down by violence and chaos. Their stories are stories of incredible resilience, but also of immense suffering. The lack of security robs people of their present and their future. It steals education from children, livelihoods from families, and hope from entire communities. Understanding their plight is the first step towards empathy and, hopefully, action. So what can we do? It starts with staying informed from reliable sources, looking beyond the sensational headlines to understand the complexities of these conflicts. We can support credible humanitarian organizations that are on the ground providing life-saving aid. Organizations like Doctors Without Borders, the International Rescue Committee, or the UN Refugee Agency. And we can use our voices to advocate for peaceful, diplomatic solutions and hold our own leaders accountable for policies that promote stability and human rights. It's a huge challenge, but ignoring it is not an option. Thank you for watching, and let's continue the conversation in the comments.